Chumbawamba shout right now in the stash? Steve.
Flashback.
Always keeps it, man. Always keeps it live. By the way, I was catching, I don't even know what show it was or what channel it was, but I think it was like Fuel TV or whatever, but they're doing a whole 90s and 2000s thing. And I felt so old.
Yep.
Because I remember like when those shows used to, and then it was like the 70s and 60s, and I was like,
oh yeah, when I heard 90s alternative on the radio, I knew that I was an old man.
Yeah, that was the beginning of the end for you.
Yeah.
That old man, ladies and gentlemen, is Kyle Yaege. He's holding down Hickman and Robinson LLP, lawyer, attorney extraordinaire, specifically in the realm of business and real estate law. And he's flanked by Charles Williams. He's holding it down over at Friedman, Brandon and Associates, and he's an attorney, but they work more in the number side of stuff. That's a CPA firm
For sure.
doing it over there in Carmel Valley. So I got these two experts in the house right now because we're talking about like pitfalls or typical shortcomings that happen in business dealings. And so if you're in a spot right now and you're either thinking about getting into one of these, or maybe you're already in one of these and you can already spot some of the pitfalls happening in your own experience, these guys are helping us shake down the four top things, the four business situations and some simple solutions. And first one, of course, we talk about misunderstandings of the contract. But number two, we're going to get into the real problem, which are the people. And in this situation, we call them the parties.
Yes.
Right? So maybe you can kick that off for us, Kyle. What's the major misunderstanding or pitfall with people?
If the parties have agreed to specific enough details, they know what they're expected to do. One of the other places that we see a lot of common sources of disagreement comes from the general personality. Either somebody isn't. You
mean there's egos in a business deal?
No way, never. So egos are a big part of it. Work ethic's a big part of it. There are some people that also just don't habitually adhere to contracts and have legal litigation trails.
Here's something, Kyle, if you can help me out too. I don't think I did a good job of this at the top. Is give us a container of what typical business deals you're talking about.
Sure. This goes from something simple, a purchase and sale agreement, to something that's more complex, a long-term commercial lease, a multi-party property acquisition, commercial property acquisition. You've got vendor agreements between businesses, or I do some construction law on the real estate side, where you've got contractors and principals and subcontractors that are all dealing with each other. These are kind of all overarching principles that are going to apply to all of those types of transactions. They're just...
So in a lot of those examples, though, this is kind of part I'm trying to get to, is that there's a relationship, there's a beginning, middle, and an end, and then there's some where the relationship continues throughout the agreement.
Yes.
And you can imagine the first one's easier to deal with people or parties. Second one, much more complex.
Absolutely. So if you're doing a one-off sale, it doesn't matter who, the identity of the person that you're doing it. If you've vetted whatever it is that you're buying, make sure that it is the thing that you think it is.
Right.
Then the deal's done. It doesn't matter whether they're a jerk or whether they're a saint. It doesn't matter. But if you have a person that you're going to have a course of dealings with, where you're committed to doing X when they do Y on down the road, and there's somebody who's going to filch on the transaction, or they're going to not follow through because they don't have the work ethic to do it, or they aren't qualified to do it, then you've got a recipe for litigation down the road.
So, Charles, knowing who you're dealing with, how does this come up over in your practice? We deal with more than numbers and stuff.
Absolutely. So you come into a deal, for example, you're going to want to see some numbers like a gross revenue projection, stuff like that.
Okay.
Who are they coming from? Where's your gross revenue projection coming from? Are you going to pull it out of the air? We call that a WAG.
A WAG? I like it. I'll give you a point for WAG.
Thanks.
Okay.
Are you going to actually have it based on some kind of actual projection? Maybe some studies, something done in the past? Your past, as Kyle was discussing?
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine actually built on things that really happened.
Right. So when it comes down to that, those are the kind of numbers that you look at when you're just forming the business.
Yeah. My experience extends to Shark Tank.
Sure.
Right? And I always love how, their valuations are hilarious, right? Like what, did your mom tell you that you were worth $1 million and your company was worth $1 million, right?
Of course, yeah.
But you only pulled about 10 grand last year? Yeah. Right. So that's your luck of the draw. That's your role in the conversation,
exactly.
Right? So how do you distill that down? And then how do you also, again, I'm not saying formulaically or anything, but from an epistemological perspective, how do you properly evaluate something in future in a future capacity.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, there are valuations. I mean, there's valuation experts out there that do that. But you kind of actually hit on something that's interesting, which is an individual could have, a worth of, $1 million just because of who they are. That's what they bring to the table, contracts.
Like if they're personally guaranteeing it or
that's fine too. But I mean, if they're, let's say it's, I don't know, let's say Colin Cowherd here.
Yeah.
He comes in. It's a whole different story when you have him there versus, maybe, I don't know, just some other guy.
Which is a lot of the reason why people get celebrities to kind of back a lot of these ventures, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, knowing what we talked about too is if you know your parties and you guys have the same goals, then you're going to be in the better place than if you have two different goals where one is, hey, self-promotion, the other one's, maximizing profits, the other one's minimizing tax. You just want to make sure that all those goals are up front.
God, it just sounds so easy for you to prescribe that. But I mean, the truth is, especially when the larger the amount, the more savvy the people involved, the more BS filter you got to get through, right? And by BS, I mean belief system, right, guys?
Yeah, belief system.
Right.
Belief system.
And so how do you help coach and counsel the average Joe or Jack or Jane through that? I mean, talk about a Shark Tank.
Yeah. Well, history is the greatest measure for who you're getting into bed with in a contract.
Okay, and how do you get, so other than just someone's resume they're purporting, like how do you get into that?
So jumping on the numbers bandwagon here, if they give you financial reports and it's somebody that you really don't have a lot of dealings with, don't have faith in, or don't have any reason to have faith in, you can look at past tax returns, you can look at bank statements, you can look at, there are certain public records indexes that you can look at to see if they've been in litigation before, if they've had liens placed against their property, et cetera, to see if they are the person who they represent themselves to be. And the more involved the transaction is, the further back you're going to want to look at those things, in addition to dealing with personal guarantees, like you mentioned, that kind of thing. But if you're evaluating the person to make sure they are who they represent that they are, references are a great way. Looking at past transactions is a great way, but history in general is where you look to before you jump into a transaction, and the bigger the transaction is, the more time you should spend on it.
Kyle, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Now, I know you can't because you got the lawyer thing going on, but ask you to get super specific, but case in point, like how did the discovery process of history work really well for maybe something in the not too distant past that you helped?
Let's do I'll give you an example of a transaction that went not so good.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Or not good for you.
Well, no. It was. It was one of those where we were called in on the back end.
Okay.
This was after the transaction had fallen apart, and these were two buddies. They were actually roommates at a point in time, and one of them had an invention, had patented it, had followed all of those steps that you needed to establish a business. His roommate and he are getting along, and the roommate says, "Hey, why don't I take over the marketing piece of this? I'll help you with your business, and you give me a share of it, and that way we can kind of grow together."
Sounds good.
Well, the roommate was more of a fly-by-night character than he expected him to be, and as soon as the documents were signed establishing this right to an ownership in the company, that gentleman disappeared with all the passwords to access the website where the goods were sold.
Intellectual capital.
Yeah, the intellectual capital. Well, they actually were selling things online. And so all of a sudden they find in a place where the business is stalled because not only is this person not marketing for them, but the tools to achieve that marketing goal had been handed over to the person who was now MIA. And we had to go through a full-blown lawsuit to get a judgment against that person declaring that they no longer had an ownership interest in the company so that we could regain control of all that marketing apparatus and get them back on their feet.
And the pet rock was born.
And the pet rock was born.
Yeah.
In this case, it was a beach-oriented project. Came out of San Diego. Brilliant. I'll throw a shout out to Rusty. He knows who he is.
Okay, fair enough. Rusty.
What?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, good. So what else can we vet through? I mean, obviously, the whole human capacity. I mean, listen, everything's really simple until we go in there and meddle it up and make it very complicated, right? So you could spend the whole show, all 4 topics on the parties.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
So anything else from the number side that you want to kind of pepper in on this, Charles?
Actually, not a numbers thing, but one other thing that's important is, Kyle, like Kyle was saying, he's going to do the vetting, but it's really important that your client listens to you. That's the key. I mean, as long as you're there on the front end of the process, and you're going to do all the homework, you definitely want to make sure that you know both parties and that they're taking your advice.
That makes total sense. I would say probably the biggest challenge is that they don't get you guys involved early enough.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Always.
Yeah. What percentage of people are wise enough beyond their experience, perhaps, to get you guys involved on the front end rather than the back end?
I found that people that have been burned in a serious way once tend to make that decision the right way the next time.
Yeah.
A lot of folks, it's always a time value thing. So, people look at attorneys and they go, wow, they're expensive. But, I can tell you, for example, I do a lot of commercial leasing review work after the brokers are done with their thing, because brokers do a separate job from what attorneys do.
Right.
I can review the portions of the lease the broker doesn't look at, and there are clients that have come to me after they've had a lease blow up in their face, and help them understand what they're actually signing on to in terms of their obligations going forward. And it's growing. I'm hopeful because the numbers grow as the years of practice add on.
So then, if we can distill this down, just like we did in the first segment with misunderstandings of the contract, when it comes to parties, I would say chief on that list, even though it goes against people's better judgment to just run towards lawyers, because there's always that heuristic, like, anytime there's a lawyer involved, they're the only ones who win.
That's not without merit. That's not without merit.
Well, and right, there's some truth to that, obviously, which is why we got some good guys in the house to be able to represent the positive flag. But so getting you guys involved early, could that be one sort of lesson or takeaway from this?
That is absolutely a lesson, and not necessarily just one. I mean, there are a lot of attorneys that will do a consultation for free or for relatively inexpensive, and they'll talk to you about what their plan is for your particular situation. And different attorneys are going to have different courses of progress, and talking to 1 or 2 or 3 and getting an idea of what that kind of span. If you hear the same thing from all 3 attorneys, you probably know what direction you need to go.
Yeah, that sounds good. Charles, anything to add?
No.
Okay, good. Well, then I feel complete about that topic. So then, gentlemen, let's get everybody all caught up. We got ESPN radio, so we'll get them all sportsed up for the half hour here, and then coming up, we'll get into the concept of overcommitment, which is something that is so interesting in your guys' capacity, how it's juxtaposed from how it works over in my capacity, and a couple lessons therein. So thanks for hanging out in the Stash Gang. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back with Charles and Kyle.